I'll just introduce myself in a few words. I'm in charge of all of Google's advertising products for a region that covers parts of Europe, the Middle East, Africa. And obviously, one of our main focus areas for the last couple of years has been mobile, for a number of reasons, and I'm going to try to convince you today of that. I'm going to try to do three things today. I'm going to bring some data to make the case of why we think mobile devices, smartphones, the mobile web, is going to disrupt the internet dramatically. And I think people underestimate that, that effectively it's going to become the internet, and that the implications are profound. People, as often with big technology disruptions, people underestimate them at first and then overestimate them. We're still in the phase where we underestimate the impact that smartphones will have on the internet and on business over the next 3 years. So that's the first case. That's the first thing I'm going to do. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make some predictions relative to that, about what's going to happen over the next 12 to 18 months that we think you will see in Israel, you will see abroad, that potentially will affect the way you do business. And then I'll finish with some advice, some suggestions about what you can take away from today, some things you might want to do in your company to prepare for that. Okay? So let's get started. So actually, we've been saying this for a long time. This is a picture that dates from the Mobile World Congress, which is the big conference of the mobile industry from 2010. Where our CEO at the time, which is now just our chairman, said that we were definitely going mobile first as far as Google is concerned. So effectively, now when we design new products, whether they're consumer or business-oriented, we focus first on its mobile version before we worry about the desktop version. Why is that? Because we predict that the majority of the internet traffic will be done from mobile devices, take or leave it, within the next 2 years. And we see some elements of that. I'll show some data, but every time we look at our statistics about the percentage of our traffic, the percentage of our searches that are coming from mobile phones and smartphones, we hardly can believe it ourselves. And that's probably one of the first things you may want to do is if take a look at the traffic to your website and try to see what percentage of it is already coming from smartphones. And chances are, if you've never done it, you might be surprised. Why is that? Well, today, if we look at sales of mobile phones, 90% of the smartphones sold in the world are smartphones. So people are just basically entirely shifting to mobile phones that can connect to the internet. And that's everywhere in the world. Even if you go to the poorest parts of Africa, you can now buy a smartphone for $100, $80. Chinese non-branded smartphones that make them affordable for the middle class there. So it's reasonable to expect that the majority of mobile phones in the world will be smartphones within a couple of years. And that's going to dramatically change the internet landscape because most internet connections will become mobile. In addition, there's been the disruption brought by tablets, right, which are selling by millions, the iPad and others. They're still on growth rates of 400% or 500% year on year. And that question might come, are tablets really mobile? In our view, there's something in between. What we see when we look at how people use iPads is some of it is replacing traditional desktop consumption behavior. Some of it is new forms of internet behavior that we haven't seen before. So I would really place it as a device kind of in the middle, and we tend to consider it more as a mobile device ultimately. If we look at Israel-specific data, relying on some internal Google data as well as smartphone penetration, today, every day, there's already 2.5 million queries coming from mobile devices, okay? Depending on which part of the world you're talking about today, we see on Google anything between 10 to 25% of queries coming to our search engine coming from mobile devices. In some query categories, we see already more queries coming from smartphones than from desktop. So in some parts of our business, the majority of traffic is already coming from smartphones. And it's growing very, very fast. So that's why we're encouraging you to pay attention, because before you know it, you will see most of the visitors to your website visiting from smartphones and tablets. And it will take you by surprise. If we look at mobile penetration of smartphones in Israel, take it or leave it, it's about 46%, which puts it at par with most developed markets. And probably by the end of the year, the majority of smartphones in places like Israel, like the US and Europe, will be smartphones, more than 50%. So again, a growth rate that's tremendous. This is for the anecdote, but do the test. Anytime you're in a public place, like today, for example, look at what people are doing. majority of people are in front of their screens, in public transport, in waiting rooms, wherever you are. Is there anyone in this room that still has a traditional phone that does not have a smartphone? Raise your hand, because you deserve a prize. Ah, you've got one. Okay. Well, maybe we should give you a Google Nexus at the end then to fix that. But this is telling, right? And as I was waiting and looking at watching the presentation before, most of the audience was taking a quick look at their smartphone every 2 minutes, right? And that's the reality. And I know you could say we're not representative of the overall population, but eventually this room will be quite representative. To give you another stat, in the US, they already account for the mobile web as one form of media. So when they look at how people consume media between TV, print, press, the internet, they now have the mobile web as a separate form of media. The mobile web in the US over the entire population represents 12% of media consumption, which is already higher than print. So today, people consume more media on mobile phones than they read newspapers in the US. So it's become a bigger media from a time consumption perspective than printed press. Something worth considering. The other thing about the mobile web is the type of consumption, the type of behavior that we see is fundamentally different, which you would expect because people are on the move. So we see a significantly higher percentage of browsing searches that relate to local information. People are looking for stuff around them. That's the primary use of smartphones, one of the primary uses of smartphones. In Israel, 40% of Israeli mobile users seek local information, and a lot of them take action after that. So again, we'll talk about it a little bit later. It's very clear that there will be business opportunities with smartphones when it comes to driving people to stores, to physical outlets, to physical branches. That's where, so to say, the money is. It'll be in connecting the internet to the physical world, something that wasn't quite possible with the desktop, and an opportunity that mobile offers. So that's probably one thing to consider, is how we can use smartphones to drive people to your physical branches, if you have any. The other thing that's going to change the way we use the internet dramatically is the smartphone has different peripherals. There's different ways to interact with the internet. In particular, you're not so much relying on the keyboard. This is a screenshot from an advertising campaign Google did in London to promote its Google voice search. Beyond the anecdote, the point is to say, again, the way you're going to use the internet is not going to be text-based anymore, because you'll be using your voice. On the iPhone, there's the Siri application, and the phone is going to be talking to you, and you're going to be talking to the phone, which again raises the question is a traditional website as we know it the right way to be present on the internet? Another thing that you're all aware of is that on smartphones, people don't necessarily access the internet through a traditional website. They use apps, which requires different ways of bringing people to the app. It's not quite like a website, and the way to maintain them is slightly different. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Last, another thing that is changing the game is that slowly, mobile phones are also becoming payment mechanisms, which of course, you're all from the financial services industry, is quite significant. So some of you may have heard about Google Wallet, which is Google's project to basically make mobile phones a means of payment. And essentially, we are a technology platform, so we don't do it on ourselves. It's essentially a way to digitize all your credit cards, all your loyalty cards into one app that you can then use. And the value is that people can potentially also digitize their coupons so that, for example, if they then pay at the payment counter, if they have a coupon or a promotion already registered in their phone, it's automatically applied to the price. Now, some people wonder why Google is going into this business. And it's often not fully appreciated. We're not so much in the business of Google Wallet to be in the transactions industry. And for that matter, we don't plan on making any money out of the transactions themselves. One of the differentiating aspects is we don't take a commission on the payment. Why did we build an open source payment solution? It's because we see a lot of value in having a single repository of transaction data that is tied to advertising data. Because potentially for the first time, the advertising industry may have the ability to have much more deterministic ROI between advertising and payments by matching advertising data with payment data. So as an advertiser, You know how much advertising you've spent on the internet, who has been exposed to what advertising, and then you have information about what people have actually bought. And that's the interesting bit. It's improving the ROI of the advertising industry at large that is really of interest to us, not so much the payments side of things. That being said, and I'm mentioning this because I'm speaking to an audience from the financial industry, this is quite disruptive for the financial industry as well. Some of you may be aware of what's going on in Africa, which is actually the first continent to start putting mobile payments in place without using fairly simple technology. The majority of Kenyan citizens have an account now that relies on a mobile phone, and that can only be used on a mobile phone. In Kenya, there are bank accounts for which you can only pay through a mobile phone and that carry interest. Why is that? Because very few people have credit cards, there are very few ATMs, and so the only alternative, basically, was to have payments through mobile phones. And new banks have been created out of this that disrupted the old ones. So this may create significant shifts in the financial services industry when it really grows. The other thing that is interesting about mobile phone is it connects quite well to another big trend in the internet, which is social, and the use of social data and social networks, because there is nothing more individual as a device than a mobile phone. You carry it with yourself all the time. It's next to you when you sleep. Most people say that they would rather lose their wallet than lose their mobile phone. That says very much about how significant it's become. And so it's very strongly tied to social behavior on the web, and we'll talk a little bit about it. Last, it's also become a primary entertainment device. The entire business of portable game consoles, Nintendo DS, PSPs, made by Sony and the like, is being destroyed by smartphones. They don't sell anymore Nintendo DS, or barely. Why is that? Because people who want to play games play them on their smartphone. Let's do another survey. Who in this room has never played with Angry Birds? There you go, 2 or 3, and then one hand was dropped. Actually, you realize that you did. One person out of a room of 100. There's 125 years of Angry Birds played every day, if you add up the amount of time that's spent. You could argue that's terrifying, but that's a reality. And actually, that's an old stat. It's probably bigger by now. There's 200 million playbacks on mobile YouTube every day. It's a significant percentage of the videos that are being watched from mobile devices. And a lot of people actually use their mobile as their primary access to YouTube. So it's becoming a major entertainment device, which means a lot of time spent in front of a screen, which again plays in favor of making this a significant media. People spend a lot of their entertainment time in front of their mobile screen, which makes it a primary media channel. It's another thing to keep in mind. So we're all on mobile. That's the reality, right? That's essentially the case I was trying to make. We're searching, we're shopping, we're socializing, we're doing all sorts of things. And we expect businesses to be there, and we expect businesses to offer an experience that's adapted to the device. And I think that's the first question you need to ask yourself, and maybe do the test is, what happens today when a prospect or an existing consumer of yours wants to access your website from the smartphone? What is the experience? Is your website actually usable? Will he get a good experience and one that's customized to the device? Simple test. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. First, let me make my 10 or 12 predictions based on as I promised, about what we think is going to happen to build on this big momentum and why it's important not to be left behind. First, we expect that by the end of the year, we'll have more than 1 billion people in the world for which the mobile device will be the primary internet access point. It will be their only or main way to access the internet will be a mobile device. Number 2, based on our 2011 data, we expect that there will be at least 10 days in the year where we will see more than 50% of mobile queries coming from mobile devices. Because it's partly seasonal, but we have a few days like that in 2011, where we have huge spikes in mobile searches, which is telling us that there are some circumstances where already mobile is overtaking desktop. 3, at least based on what we're doing internally, we think that by the end of the year, we'll have very strong evidence that demonstrates the role that mobile phones or smartphones play in driving people into physical branches. Deterministic, reliable measurement mechanisms that allow you to say, for 1,000 people that visit your website, X hundred will eventually go into your store. We're doing different things in this respect. This will surprise people by how effective it is. And it will probably open a lot of business opportunities. 4, as a consequence of what I said before, we'll also see a new spend category in consumption, which is what we call mobile-driven spend. So people buying on the base of what they saw on their mobile phone, and either doing a purchase or going to a location based on having access to that information on mobile. 5, as a consequence, again, new consumer behaviors will appear. And we're already seeing some of that. I'll illustrate that a little bit later. There's types of consumption. There's behaviors that did not exist before smartphones that are starting to appear in some industries, in the travel industry in particular. And I'll show some examples. 6, tablets will officially and finally become the 4th screen. TV, desktop, mobile, tablet. And it's fitting nicely into the day. We see people using them typically in the evening, in parallel to television, and again, with usage patterns that are very specific to that device, and that make it quite complementary to other screens. 7, one thing we think that will be solved is that for the moment, when you try to do advertising on mobile phones or use any of the mobile marketing solutions that exist, people are usually discouraged by the lack of standards. It's very complicated. Every advertising network uses different technology, and it's essentially a pain in the ass to do. Like the rest of the internet, all of that is going to be standardized in 2012, and that will make things a lot easier for agencies and for advertisers to start using mobile as a media channel. So the mobile internet, if you like, is going through the stage at which the traditional internet went about 7 or 8 years ago, when things started to standardize in terms of advertising formats, ad serving technologies, measurement rules. That's all being put in place now, and that will help make this media much easier to buy and therefore much more significant. 8, we expect a lot of other angry birds. So companies that come out of nowhere with 5 guys in a room and then blow through the roof in terms of usage, of revenue, of patterns. And the speed and the virality of these companies is even greater than what we see with normal internet startups. I'm sure a lot of you have read in the news about Facebook buying Instagram for $1 billion. Arguably, some people could say this is kind of ridiculous, but it's kind of showing the speed at which these things grow. Instagram is a company that didn't exist 2 years ago. It's a 12-people company, and they sold for $1 billion. Why? Because their usage and their user base grew tremendously fast, entirely on the back of mobile. 9, again, tied to some of the things I said before, there'll be increasing evidence that the ROI of mobile and tablet advertising is good and is increasing because we'll be better at measuring it. And therefore, people will be more confident about putting dollars into mobile and tablet advertising. In particular, because the ability to know the user's location allows you to do targeted advertising in a way that doesn't exist at all on the desktop. So potentially, you can only target, for example, people that are less than a mile around your branch or things like that with a targeted message. And potentially, that will drive ROI through the roof. 10, we expect that the intersection of mobile and social will spark dramatic new forms of consumption and engaging consumers as well. And I'll mention that. I'll give some examples of that a little bit later. 11, also, we'll see a big migration of most websites to mobile-compatible HTML5 sites. So that's one of the big things, one of the big challenges today is that many websites don't work well on mobile because of the format, because they carry Flash. And as you know, Flash doesn't run on smartphones, at least on the Apple systems, because iOS does not run Flash. So a lot of companies have a great website, but a website that actually doesn't work on a smartphone or doesn't work on a tablet. And we expect that migration to happen in 2012. People will realize that that's not a good option. If 25% of your traffic is coming from mobile devices, your website better work on those devices. Last, the other thing that mobile will open is it will create a lot of opportunities for small businesses. Because again, if you're a small business with a local presence, actually having the opportunity to drive consumers into your store at a manageable cost is very attractive. And smartphones give you a lot of opportunities that way, and we're going to be at Google doing a number of things around that. So those are the predictions. I think we expect 2012 to be the year where worldwide businesses start to realize that there's a massive shift in consumer behavior and a massive shift towards mobile devices, and it's kind of time to wake up. And that's kind of the case I'm trying to make to you today is, if that's not the case already in your company, now is the time to seriously look at what your plans are on mobile, because before you know it, you'll see most of your traffic coming from mobile. So, what does it take to get going? Or if you don't want to get left behind, so to say. I'm going to make some tips, some things you may want to look at or consider when you come back and do your planning for your business around 4 ideas. One of the 4 questions that you should probably ask yourself. First one is mobile going to dramatically change my business or the business models in my industry? We think that smartphones in some industries are going to change revenue and cost structure in a big way. I mentioned mobile payments before. There are other reasons why I believe mobile could have a significant impact. And I have actually a couple of examples of thoughts around financial industry. Second, what about my marketing? How can I adapt my marketing quickly to the reality of a lot of people connecting to the web through mobile? What changes? How do I change the way I use internet advertising? 3, how do I adapt my organization to mobile? And 4, how do I need to change my web presence? Right now, most of you have a website, hopefully. Maybe some of you have an app. Maybe some of you have a mobile-optimized website. How do I reconcile all this? So those are really 4 big questions, and I strongly encourage you to make sure that you have an answer to these 4 by the end of the year, because otherwise, sort of say, you might end up in serious trouble. First, let's get into how does mobile change my value proposition. Again, here our thesis is that there are some industries where smartphones will be fundamentally disruptive. They will allow the entrance of new players, or they will change the cost structure in a significant way. And you need to think through how the fact that people can access your services on a mobile device can change the game in different ways. And let me give you some examples and some thoughts behind it. In the US, which is in this respect relatively well advanced, there are a number of banks that offer a lot of services through mobile websites and mobile apps. Chase Manhattan in particular is one of the more advanced, where essentially you kind of have an ATM or a bank counter in your pocket. So in particular, you can deposit a check by simply taking a picture of the check in a secure way and sending it to your bank, and it's credited. You don't even have to send the check anymore. Another example, in Spain, there's a couple of banks where you don't even need your credit card to take money out of the ATM anymore. You basically log into their apps, enter a secure code, and money comes out of the machine by magic. So the digitization of credit cards is already starting to happen, and the digitization of counters and ATMs is starting to happen. So if you extrapolate this, and if it's reasonable to assume that in a few years, most of the standard tasks and transactions that are taking place in branches, such as taking checks into account or cash deposits and the like, will probably reduce in volume. Most of this will be done through smartphones. So the need for ATMs will reduce. The need for standard counters at branches will reduce. The role of branches will fundamentally change. So that's the first thing to consider. Keep an eye on what's going on with innovation in this space, because it's potentially going to significantly affect the way banks are organized. To give you another example of how mobile is changing industries and disrupting and creating new behaviors, we're seeing a lot of very surprising changes in the travel industry already. And this is something we found out because some of our travel clients shared this with us. Hotels.com, which is one of the biggest websites when it comes to booking hotels in the world, has been very early in the game in developing an app to allow people to book hotels on the go based on location, getting last-minute discounts. And what they're finding out is that these apps that allow you to book flights and book hotels are creating new forms of consumer behavior that they did not anticipate. Essentially, the majority of the hotel bookings that are done through their app is done within 1 day of the actual date of booking, if not on the day. And most of these bookings are also done when the consumer is less than 5 miles from the actual hotel. in significant volumes. What exactly does this mean? It means that a lot of consumers are actually happy to book their hotel at the very last minute, once they've actually arrived on destination, and find the latest, cheapest deal, taking advantage of the fact that hotels with a lot of empty rooms will do last-minute promotions that will be very aggressive. So they're taking the risk of not finding a hotel room in order to get a cheaper price, which is something that did not exist before. And now there's a significant percentage of their sales that are done in that way. Last-minute, opportunistic bookings done on the day. So it's forcing them to reconsider entirely even their pricing strategy, right? Because, as you know, the hotel business is based entirely on yield management and right price depending on the occupation rate of your hotels. And they're seeing new forms of behaviors from consumers that did not exist before, just because people can now decide to book a hotel at the last minute when they're on site. So we expect that there'll be a lot of similar behaviors appearing. People taking advantage of the fact that they have information at their fingertips and behave in a very different way. Another new behavior that's appearing is in-store behaviors that did not exist before, because now, as you know, there are a lot of applications on smartphones that allow you essentially to scan a barcode when you're in a store and compare prices and know what the price of that same item is in the stores around you or potentially on the internet. Amazon made a lot of the headlines during the last holiday season because to promote their mobile app, they basically said that they would give $5 to anyone that would scan an object in a store, and instead of buying it in the store, order it right away on Amazon and have it delivered at home. And they got millions of people doing this. So imagine you're the owner of Target or Walmart, because this was in the US. You spend billions building stores out there, and all of a sudden they essentially become showrooms for Amazon, because that's essentially what's going on. So this new term going on in the retail industry called showrooming, where people are asking themselves, what's the role of a retail store? And maybe the role of a retail store is not actually to sell items anymore, it's just to demonstrate them before people buy them online. Likewise, pricing in retail is disrupted heavily by this, because there's a level of price transparency that does not exist, that it did not exist before. People can compare prices on the spot. And if the shop next door is 10% cheaper, people just walk out and go next door. So again, very, very disruptive. And Walmart did a study in the US where they surveyed people who walked out of their stores without buying anything and asked them why did you come, what did you look for, why are you leaving without anything, et cetera, et cetera. Close to 40% of walkouts were influenced by smartphone usage. 40% of people said, I went to the store, I wanted to buy something, I compared prices or did something on my smartphone, and I realized this wasn't the right place to buy it. 40%. So it's very, very significant. So that's why we're saying, again, it's going to disrupt business models. It's going to disrupt the ways companies fundamentally operate. Second, let's talk about marketing more specifically, and how you need to adjust potentially your advertising strategy, your media mix, to adapt to this reality. And let's spend a couple of minutes on examples that are very specific to Google. First, our most traditional, famous product, which is search advertising and AdWords. Again, you could assume that by just ticking a box in AdWords, your ads are going to show up on smartphones as well, and that everything's fine. But that's probably not the right way to do it, because we've optimized and customized AdWords to smartphones to take advantage of the fact that, again, we have location information. We can redirect users potentially to one of your branches, or we can allow them to click to call your call center. So to give you an example of what that means is if you were in the business of selling jeans, for example, you would have to, if you wanted to be best practice, you would have to build a difference between what you do on the desktop and what you do on smartphone. And both in making sure that the landing page from the smartphone is a mobile optimized landing page, but also giving options to users that you wouldn't give on the desktop. In particular, for example, by creating a sublink that allows them to find the nearest branch. Or in the financial industry, by giving them a click-to-call button that allows them to call your call center. Because we have a click-to-call format that redirects the users to a phone number rather than redirecting them to a website. And actually, in the financial industry, that's often more effective. So even in the core business of search, our main thesis is make sure that you've optimized and created separate search campaigns geared towards mobile and what you can do on mobile, because just copying what you're doing on desktop is not going to give you the best results. One company, again, that is already doing this quite actively is Chase in the US, which essentially, again, tries to have a dedicated effort to redirect people towards branches with ROI measurement that measures how many people have actually come to the branch coming from a mobile ad. So that's for the search or direct response bit. The other thing is when you consider brand advertising campaigns, definitely start considering smartphone and tablets as an interesting fourth screen that is going to give you extra reach, extra recall, and going to reinforce the effectiveness of your overall campaign. We did a study after a campaign we did with Volvo in the US, which had a combination of TV, PC, phone, and tablet, showing the same creative across all devices. And we compared the effectiveness in terms of driving brand recall between people who'd been exposed to the TV ad only and people who'd been exposed to the same ad as well on smartphones and PCs and the like, and we saw a massive difference in brand recall just because of the incremental reach and repeated exposure. So we know that it works. We know that it is a good complement to a core TV campaign. And today, you can do very interesting things on mobile in terms of brand advertising. The only thing is that the kind of media on which you put your brand advertising is going to be different. If you want to place ads on mobile devices today, you need to place them where people spend their time. And in particular, that makes games a whole new media category that does not exist anywhere else. That's because, as I mentioned before, people spend a lot of time in front of games. And games often offer advertising placement because that's how the game publishers make money if they sell their game for free. People spend an hour, 2 hours, in some cases, playing games every day. So that's a large amount of media time of which you can take your advantage of. Here in this case, for example, Visa is a big user of this and place ads in a lot of games on iPhones. And at first, it's difficult to accept that advertising in games can actually work because it's not a traditional type of media placement you see anywhere. But it's actually quite effective. And in addition, the kind of multimedia opportunities that you can offer in these ad placements is quite good. So in this case, for example, if the user clicks on the ad, he sees a full page takeover that can be interactive, rich media, you can swipe it. There's all sorts of creative options that are quite interesting and offer very good results. So I seriously encourage you to consider this as an interesting extension to any brand advertising campaign you may have. So that's for the marketing bit. From an organizational standpoint, with everything that's changing, make sure that the organization in your company that is in charge of looking after the internet at large is also adapting to mobile. And this is a checklist of questions that I would encourage you to try to find an answer is. Are you tracking mobile first? Is it taken seriously? How often do you review stats on your mobile traffic? Do you even know the percentage of your web traffic today that is coming from smartphones? And is it being tracked? Are you able to track tablets separately as well? And if you had all that data, how would it change your business decisions? Would you be able to make changes to the way you're dealing with your web strategy if you had that data? Is there someone monitoring your competition's investment in mobile? Are you keeping track of what competition is doing? Is there someone trying to understand what your consumers are doing with mobile? So is your company already mobile connected? There's a list of questions and a list of answers that need to be found quickly in our mind. And also, is your media agency geared up to mobile? If you decide to go big, are they capable of doing it? Do they know the offers in the market when it comes to mobile advertising, and can they implement them? It's a whole new space, really, that didn't exist 2 years ago. Fourth is, once you have a good marketing strategy that you're clear on what you want to do on mobile, have you got a web presence on mobile that works? Keeping in mind some data from a survey that we did both in the US and in Europe, 57% of users will not recommend a business with a poorly designed mobile site. 40% have turned to a competitor site after a bad mobile experience. The impact on conversions and results is dramatic if your website does not render well on mobile. If it's either too dense or it carries flash or it doesn't work, just do the test. Try to do all the standard actions that you try to get out of your website from an iPhone and see if it works. And if it's painful, then you probably have a problem. We're doing a lot as far as Google is concerned on this front. If you are actually interested in getting more tips and advice and technical information on what makes a good mobile website, I just want to mention an initiative that we're doing in a number of markets called GOMO, which is essentially a big campaign to encourage companies, big and small, to build mobile websites. You can check howtogomo.com, which is the US version, but that could probably apply globally, that has a lot of suggestions and tips on what makes a good mobile website. What are the differences in UI from a technology standpoint as well that make a mobile website different from a traditional website. I encourage you to check it out. Cool. That was it for me today. Hopefully I have convinced you to take this seriously. I don't know if we have any time for questions or not. I'm not sure. If there's any questions on this matter, maybe we can take a couple. Who thinks I'm crazy? Who thinks their company is completely on top of this? Raise your hand. OK, good. One, you don't think I'm crazy. Two, you think apparently you have heard something useful. No questions? I've done my job. I've convinced you. Good. Well, thank you very much in that case.